What to keep in mind about Mitt Romney. Reading the recent excerpt from McKay Coppins' forthcoming biography of Mitt Romney of Utah, I was struck by the depth of the senator's contempt and disdain for much of the Republican Party, including many of his colleagues in the Senate. He condemned their vanity, their venality, their cowardice. Every time he publicly criticized Trump, it seemed, Coppins writes, describing Romney's account, some Republican senator would smarmily sidle up to him in private and express solidarity. Romney made note of the rank cynicism of his Republican colleagues and their almost total refusal to stand up for anything that might harm their future electoral prospects. He saved his harshest words, however, for those Republican senators who would do or say anything for political power and influence. What bothered Romney most about Hawley and his cohort was the oily disingenuousness. They know better. He told me. Josh Hawley is one of the smartest people in the Senate, if not the smartest, and Ted Cruz could give him a run for his money. They were too smart, Romney believed, to actually think that Trump had won the 2020 election. Hawley and Cruz were making a calculation, Romney told me, that put politics above the interests of liberal democracy and the Constitution. As for the latest crop of Republicans, Romney had this to say, "I don't know that I can disrespect someone more than J.D. Vance." Reading all this, which is surprisingly harsh and unsparing for someone who is still an active participant in American political life, I wonder how much of it is Romney's sublimated criticism of himself. On the occasion of Romney's retirement, which he announced this week, there have been a number of odes, retrospectives and more or less hagiographic assessments of his political career, each colored by his genuinely admirable opposition to Donald Trump. Romney was, after all, the first senator in American history to ever vote to remove a president of his own party from office. But Romney also played a significant role in giving Trump mainstream political credibility when he enthusiastically accepted the reality television star's endorsement in the 2012 Republican presidential primary. And beyond Trump, Romney, in both of his campaigns for president, eagerly and enthusiastically pandered to the right-wing rage and resentment that eventually found its champion in Trump. This was the Romney who promised to double Guantanamo in 2007 and urged self-deportation in 2012. It was the Romney who cracked, to a cheering crowd, that "no one's ever asked to see my birth certificate," and the Romney who did a great deal to appeal to the most viciously right-wing figures in his party. Romney was, not unlike the colleagues he criticizes, willing to say whatever it took to win power, even if it meant smearing nearly half the country as essentially unproductive and opening the door to some of the most corrosive forces in American political life. It is interesting that Romney has such tough words for his colleagues. But speaking as an observer of his career, it seems to me that there are tough words that Romney ought to have for himself. And if he isn't willing to go that far in public, he should at least do more than leave the scene with a parting jab at the former president. If nothing else changes, then next November, one of two men, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, will be on the way to a second term in the White House. For his role in creating this mess, I think the least Romney could do is to say, to the country, exactly who he thinks should prevail. What to keep in mind about Mitt Romney. Reading the recent excerpt from McKay Coppins' forthcoming biography of Mitt Romney of Utah, I was struck by the depth of the senator's contempt and disdain for much of the Republican Party, including many of his colleagues in the Senate. He condemned their vanity, their venality, their cowardice. Every time he publicly criticized Trump, it seemed, Coppins writes, describing Romney's account, some Vivek Ramaswamy wasn't in Model UN, but he's got that Power Del vibe. As the GOP presidential candidates begin to tussle, some former teenage diplomats see a familiar archetype, the guy who tosses bombs into foreign policy debates. You know the type, viscerally, from your high school years. The guy who proposes a land invasion of Russia in the wintertime. Head tank nuclear disarmament talks if the room won't go along with the uranium disposal plan he pulled from a random academic paper found in obscure JSTOR corners. Perhaps you'd forgotten about him, a certain Model United Nations delegate. When Ukraine's war with Russia came up in Fox News' August 23 GOP presidential primary debate, former kid diplomats found themselves back in the unsettling realm of their adolescent foreign policy debates, of strong egos in ill-fitting suits. When moderator Brett Baier asked the candidates if they'd oppose sending more money to bolster Ukraine's defense forces, businessman Vivek Ramaswamy was the only one to raise his hand high in the air. The audience erupted in applause. "I find it offensive," Ramaswamy said, "that we have professional politicians on this stage that would make a pilgrimage to Kiev, to their Pope, Zelensky, without doing the same thing for people in Maui, or the south side of Chicago, or the Philadelphia neighborhood of Kensington." Some of the professional politicians, like former Vice President Mike Pence, tried to dig into Ramaswamy by invoking what they saw as a holy Reagan-era doctrine of sending money to foreign rebels fighting communist leaders. Ramaswamy's mouth curved into a smug frown. "I have a news flash," he shot back, "the USSR does not exist anymore." Cheers in the arena. Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's former ambassador to the United Nations, countered with her own version of a crash course in containing Russia with aid to Ukraine, wearing the face of a disappointed professor as she shook her head. "Nikki, I wish you well on your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon," Ramaswamy said, referring to two large military contractors. "Oh," thought anyone watching who once survived the Model UN scene. "We know him." Santiago Mayer, 21, recalled moments from his not-so-distant past. He's the executive director of Voters of Tomorrow, a left-aligned group focused on young voters. Watching from the group's DC office, he saw a familiar character in Ramaswamy head seen at the many Model UN conferences he attended throughout high school. He remembered that pesky Egyptian delegate at a Mexico City conference eagerly disrupting discussions on space weaponry, as if Egypt had ever put more than a few satellites in orbit. "All of us are sort of annoying in the sense that we're so passionate about foreign relationships, like, I have a foreign policy magazine subscription," Mayer says. "But when you reach that level, where you're actually just pretending to be an expert when the former ambassador to the United Nations is standing right next to you, that is just next level." That was Haley's retort to Ramaswamy: "You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows." Who knows why 14- and 15-year-olds with no foreign policy experience devote 8+ years to debating these issues? The romantic explanation: escapism and wish-casting for a better world. The cynical explanation is pre-professional resume padding and ego-feeding. Being subjectively crowned best delegate can be addictive. In the taxonomy of this subculture, two broad archetypes emerge. One kind is the future alphabet bureaucrats and Capitol Hill Flax and Langley cloistered analysts, who see in Model UN an outlet for their Westphalian passions. The other kind are known in these circles, somewhat derogatorily, as power dells. The label, former model owners agree, can ruin reputations. Power dells tend to filibuster, scramble the diplomatic board and bulldoze over group consensus. Which is what some, liberals in particular, see in Ramaswamy. For the Trump version of the Republican Party today that often puts a premium on the dominating alpha male archetype, he fit that mold pretty well, says Ryan Shea, a D.C. lobbyist who has worked in legislative affairs for sundry Democratic lawmakers. Shea's most memorable run-in with a power dell? Food insecurity talks, like 15 years ago. Both types of Model UN formers can end up in D.C., in Democratic press shops or the State Department or as a character in the Russiagate saga. "There's a specific type of energy that I think a lot of us recognize," says one